Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Peterpodcast. I'm your host, reporter Taylor Clydesdale, and with me this week is my editor, Lois Tuffin. And our special guest this week is Dave Smith from the PC Party. Dave is running for the position of MPP for the Peterborough and the Kawartha riding, and today we talk about his party leader, Doug Ford.
My opinion of Doug has changed significantly since I've actually had the chance to meet him and spend some time with him. He's one of the most approachable, down-to-earth guys I've ever met. And it's kind of funny that you say that someone who is as personally wealthy as he is basically just like one of the other guys.
And we also talk about the PC's platform and dive into what the PCs are planning to do about the environment if elected. So, hope you enjoy the show.
I'm Dave Smith. I moved to Peterborough in 1989. Went to Trent University for a Bachelor of Science in Computing Systems. When I was at Trent, I decided that this was the community I wanted to raise my kids in. Didn't have any at that point.
I was going to say, that's early, okay.
But it's a great community. I moved here from Prince Edward County. I made the joke that the first time I saw Brock Towers, my thought was you could stack a lot of hay into that building. I moved to the big city when I moved here. After finishing my degree, I didn't finish it in the 4 years like most people did. Mine took a lot longer. I went on and got a Master's in Business Administration. The specialty streams that I've done for my MBA are in Business Analytics and in Global Leadership. That MBA came from the University of Fredericton. I've worked for Kawartha Pine Ridge, for for Tram Lakeland's District School Board, and while I was at Kawartha Pine Ridge in the IT department, I did some cross work with PB&C, things that PB&C was looking for that KPR had the expertise in. They loaned me out for it. I have been manager of product development for a software company here in town for about 12 years now. I'm the principal developer on a number of different applications that are used in education. One of our key products is the IP Writer. It's used by 52% of the English language boards in the province. And I'm also the lead developer on all of our experiential learning software used by 58% of the English language school boards. So I'm well versed in exceptionalities, special needs students, in gifted students, all of the things that go on at the school board for that, as well as with experiential learning, cooperative education, specialist high skills major, Ontario Youth Apprenticeship programs. In the early 2000s, I got involved with the local hockey scene. I was a trainer on a hockey team. My son was involved in hockey. I became a coach, and then I moved up and became the director of player development for the PCCHL, and eventually became the president of the PCCHL. When I was the president, 38% of the kids who were playing hockey in Peterborough were receiving some form of assistance to pay for registration. And we looked at it and said that hockey was just too expensive. I firmly believe that in team sports, kids can learn everything they need to know socially to move forward in life. Sometimes you're playing with your best friends. Sometimes you're playing with people that you don't know at the beginning of the year. Sometimes you're playing with people that you may not like. They're on your team. You may be playing against your best friend, or you may be playing against people that you don't necessarily like. Sometimes you have a great coach. Sometimes you have a poor coach. And you have to have the dynamic to work through all of that. Sometimes you're on the ice when your team scores. Sometimes you're on the ice when the other team scores. And most of the time, with all sports, you're actually on the bench, and your role is to cheer your teammates on.
Sounds like there's a lot of similarities between hockey and politics.
And life in general.
Okay.
Because everything that we will go through in life, you're going to find times when you're working that some of your coworkers you may not get along with all that well. Some of your coworkers become your best friends.
So if you can survive hockey politics, does that mean that you can make it? Because the hockey politics is interesting.
It is. I've said numerous times that as a politician, I will likely have less death threats than I did as the president of the Hockey Association.
Okay, we'll avoid death threats today, I think. We'll be good. You're in a safe space. We're good.
So you're running right now for the position of MPP for the Peterborough Kawartha riding.
Yes.
Running against Sean Conway and incumbent Liberal MPP Jeff Leal.
Yes.
Jeff has...
And some others.
And some others, yes. I can't knock Gian Broughton or Ken Ronnie or any of the others. But, Jeff Leal seems to be kind of your one of your biggest political rivals right now in this election. Mm-hmm. And he has 33 years of political experience.
He does.
So what makes you qualified to be running and be in the job that he's in now?
Well, I think if you take a look at what life experiences everyone has had, that will dictate or that will show you how well someone will perform in something else. With the amount of education I have more education than any of the other candidates that are running right now, locally, that is. I've also been involved with a number of not-for-profit associations. I have managed large budgets. I've pulled off things that other people have said you can't do.
That'd be like under the lock hockey tournament,
Under the Lock Hockey
the
Tournament,
special needs international hockey tournament.
Hockey Day in Canada, we had 26 days to put that together. Most communities have 10 months.
Okay.
With the Special Hockey International, we were told that we could never put on a international hockey event for special needs kids with only 4 months lead time.
Okay.
And we did it. There were a lot of challenges, but if it's the right thing to do, you find a way to do it.
So is that a parallel to coping in Queen's Park in a quagmire of party politics and owed favors?
Yeah, and when you look at a lot of times how government functions, you'll have a lot of administrators or bureaucrats who will tell you that things have always operated this way. That's why it needs to continue operating that way. But if you look at what I've done in this community, especially in the hockey community, over the last number of years, I've been told so many times you can't do something because it's always been done that way. The PCCHL and the PMHA existed for more than 60 years as separate entities.
They did.
They had 4 failed attempts at amalgamation. No one was able to do it. But it was the right thing to do. We were saving families money by putting them together. We were finding efficiencies that way. Don't let someone say to you, you can't do it. There's a Chinese proverb that says, those who say it can't be done need to get out of the way of those who are doing it.
I'm going to grab hold of something you just said about finding efficiencies, because let's talk about your party's platform for a moment. The Liberal Party is kind of looking at their previous budgets and they're saying, this is our platform.
Yes.
And we're kind of going to be going along with kind of more of the same on that route. The NDP has their fully costed platform, plus or minus $1.4 billion.
$1.4 billion per year, yes.
Yeah, that kind of got miscounted in there.
Counting a liability as an asset.
Yeah, so one of the big criticisms that I hear of the PCs is that the platform is kind of vague. Maybe you can dive into that. Do you think that's the case?
No, not at all. I think if you go to www.ontariopc.com/platform, you'll see all of the platform items broken down by cost on what we have released up to this point. And because we're so close to the election now, virtually all of the platform has been released at that point.
Yeah, because the cost was the piece that people were waiting for, right? Because
That's
dollar
right.
cents is a big part of this election, and that's been part of one of the things that you've been trying to push is, and that Doug Ford keeps saying, is put more money into people's pockets, but
That's right.
people need to see how the overall picture of finance is going to work.
Now, there's interesting ways that the parties are dealing with that, because both the Liberals and the NDP are following what the Liberal accounting system was, which Bonnie Lisk, our Auditor General, has said is wrong, and they're not accounting for almost $6 billion worth of liabilities. We're not going to be following that same platform that way. We have all of those liabilities laid out in ours. So when people take a look at it, there's going to be some significant differences right off the bat, because we're including that $6 billion worth of debt, or lack of asset, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Okay, and yet Mr. Ford is saying that there's all these efficiencies to be found on top, but you're going to have to count on those liabilities. So
Yeah. So I can give you a very specific example because of my
I welcome
MBA.
it, because I've heard a lot of stuff, and I'm not buying yet.
The final project, the thesis that I did as my MBA was on infrastructure in Ontario. Right now,
remember that.
as of February, we have 919 vacant buildings that the province of Ontario owns. Last year, we paid $275 million to maintain them. They're vacant, they're empty. If we did nothing more than give those properties away,
Millbrook Jail.
there's a $275 million savings right there. We're not going to just give them away. The properties that it makes sense for us to continue holding and leasing, we will do that. Those properties that we should be divesting ourselves of because they add no value to the province itself, then we will divest ourselves of those. That will cut that $275 million loss out, as well as generate revenue through the lease itself or through the sale of those properties that Ontario no longer needs or no longer uses.
Okay.
There's a very specific example that we can get into the billions of dollars worth. The other thing is that Bonnie Lisk, the Auditor General, reviewed 14 programs that the province implemented and found just over $1 billion worth of waste in those 14 programs. There's over 900 programs that the the province actually has, or that the government actually has. So if we take those 14 as an example, and we found $1 billion in waste from the Auditor General, the independent body who is to oversee this, it'll be very easy to find other areas where there is significant waste.
Now, what do you classify as waste?
Where there's no value for the money that has been spent. One of the examples that she has referred to, but she has not actually done the complete audit on, was from 2014 until 2017, $22.5 billion was spent on investing in businesses in Ontario. But there was no measures being used afterwards to determine whether or not that money resulted in the company doing better, or whether or not it was actually being used for what the company had said that they were going to use it for.
So is that waste or just unaccounted?
It's unaccounted
Metrics.
for. And when you don't have anything that you're going to be measuring against, how do you know whether or not that program is a success? How do you know whether or not the industries that you're investing in are having a return back to the province?
Okay. I don't know. To me, that's unknown if it's a waste.
It
Waste
is.
is a strong term, but I agree. But I understand that investing in business is an important thing.
It is an important
Yeah.
thing, but you have to do it in a measured and responsible way. And if you have no way of measuring the success of something, then how can you claim that it was a success?
That's why we hate
So-
headlines that say something is a success. Yes.
So, do you need to take a look at the books before you kind of know what exactly needs to be fixed? Or
We have committed to doing a line-by-line audit on all of the ministries. And I think that that's a really responsible way of doing it. I've been told a number of times that you can't take a business approach to governing, and I disagree with that completely. In the industry, we do needs analysis and gaps analysis before we come out with whatever it is that we're going to make changes on. If you don't do a needs analysis, then how do you know what the actual need is? If you don't do a gap analysis, then how do you know where there are gaps in the system? How do you know where there are things that are working well, but they're missing something else? An excellent program that is underfunded is a waste of money because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So you need to make sure that you're doing your needs analysis and your gaps analysis to make sure that those programs are funded appropriately so that they actually do what they're supposed to. Spending a lot of money on a program that doesn't meet its objectives is also a waste of money. Again, it comes back to doing that analysis. What are you looking for? What do you want to accomplish? How do you get there? And if you don't measure how you're going to get there or what you've done, then you have no way of knowing whether or not it was effective.
so this audit, would that be a first-party audit or a third-party?
That would be a third-party audit.
Okay. Do you know who would be brought in to do that?
And we haven't decided on that yet. That's something that whenever you're spending taxpayers' money, you must be very responsible for it. So we would be issuing an RFP for it to come up with who would be the best person to do it or the best company to do it. We wouldn't simply say, we're handing this over to one of our friends.
The process you're describing is already used by the Ontario Petroleum Foundation. It's a very rigorous process. So, and it takes a lot of manpower and a lot of energy.
It does.
So that's going to cost some resources as well. And
It,
this audit. So
it will.
It's going to.
But when you do an audit, you're looking at, you wouldn't audit something that was a $10,000 expense and spend $12,000 to do the audit. That would be a waste of
I
money.
would hope not.
We're talking about a $150 billion budget. So if we were to spend a large amount of money, and a large amount could be $10 million, it could also be $1 million. It depends on who you're talking to for a large amount of money. That's money that's well spent because now you're determining whether or not the money that has been used is being used effectively and where there is waste. We already know that there's $1 billion in waste in 14 programs. That was done by Bonnie Lissick. So let's throw a round number out and say that we spend $100 million on it. If we find $1 billion worth of waste that can be cut, that's a $900 million savings. And that is well worth doing. Again, if we're only talking about a $10,000 project and it costs us $12,000 to do the audit, then it's not worth doing that.
Okay.
But we're talking about a $150 billion budget.
Just in regards to, balancing the budget, we did an unscientific survey at the beginning of the month, late April, and we just asked people, what mattered to them. Cutting key services in order to balance the budget or running a deficit in order to fund key services. And it was a fairly 50-50 split,
Right.
like 48 to 52 on both sides. So it seems that, it's a delicate balancing act.
It is.
How do you promise to, balance the budget while maintaining funding for, social services while maintaining funding for healthcare, stuff like that the province needs right now, especially with an aging population.
Yep. So it's an excellent segue into a number of different things on it, and I'm going to touch on the healthcare directly with it. The way that our system is set up right now, we have each of our ministries that function as a silo unto itself. Each of those silos have their own budget, and they don't have a cross-budget platform at all.
Yes.
So you have, what you have to remember, what everyone has to remember, is that there's only one taxpayer in Ontario. It doesn't matter whether they're paying a municipal tax, a federal tax, or a provincial tax. It's all coming into the same pocket from that same person. We have decentralized, we have centralized a number of things, and we have changed a lot of the community-based things that have happened. Mental health, for example, has not received a significant increase in funding for the last 10 years. They had 8 years of a straight budget freeze.
True.
Mental health issues in Ontario have reached almost a crisis point. And I'm going to take Peterborough as an example. Somebody in Peterborough has a mental health breakdown in public downtown. The business does the only thing they can do, which is to call the police. Mm-hmm. That's not part of the Ministry of Health budget. The 2 police officers that have to come, because it's a domestic issue, 2 police officers have to attend. That comes from the municipal taxpayer. The 2 police officers pick that person up, and they take them to the only place that they can go, the physical health ER room. Mm-hmm. That creates a backlog in the emergency room. Mm-hmm. But because it's not a physical health emergency, it's not considered a higher priority. So they'll sit there for a few hours. Those officers have to stay with that person until a doctor sees them and discharges them. When they get to see the doctor, now it's on the tab for the Ministry of Health. The doctor spends 5 or 10 minutes with them and refers them to a specialist in 3 to 6 months. Police get to leave at that point because the doctor has taken care of that person. But the municipal taxpayer has spent $500 or $600 to have those 2 police officers there. It didn't come from the Ministry of Health. It didn't
what's
come
the
from mental
alternative?
health. We need to
Because it's still a
change that whole
crisis.
process.
Right, so it's still a crisis.
It is still a crisis. The doctor releases them back to the community
That's
after
correct.
giving them the referral that they'll see a doctor in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And the process continues. Mm-hmm. So what we've been doing for the last 40 years isn't working. And we need to change that whole process. We've committed to spending another $1.9 billion over the next 10 years on mental health specifically. And what we're going to do is we're going to break down a lot of those silos. And we're going to find efficiencies in that way. If you spend, for example, significantly more money on mental health issues, the cost savings across the board are higher than what you actually did when you addressed that first issue. And part of our problem with the way the budget process works is each one is a silo.
And people are defensive over their spending.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Spend the money where it needs to be spent because you're
But are you
going to
spending
find
in
the
Ministry of
savings.
Health, or what ministry are you spending it in?
We're going to be putting money into CMHA, the Canadian Mental Health Association. We're going to be spending money in
Which gets
in
us
mental
funding
health.
from Comstock. Yeah, Community Social Services. Okay.
And we're going to change the approach that we're doing right now with
Okay, so there's a
power.
crisis in, if you're elected in 2 years, there's a crisis downtown. Do we have mental health police go and grab these guys, or you're assuming that person's already getting the treatment and there's
No,
no
we're
crisis?
going to have an intervention at an earlier point. We have Dr. Rudy, and I'm afraid I can't pronounce his last name, who's joined the team, who's going to be leading our health initiative, and they've started the consultation with people. We're actually going to be bringing in the people who are at the front line, who know where the actual issues are, dealing with the problems themselves, getting their feedback on how we're going to make the adjustment so that we're doing what is appropriate for the people who are in crisis, rather than having it come from the top down where the ministry itself is making those decisions. We're going to have it come from the bottom up. Who are the frontline workers? Who are the people who are dealing with it day to day? How do they see it?
So what changes in that example that you just used? Someone is downtown Peterborough. They're having a mental health crisis right now, and they're having a lot of issues that are very public and a lot of people can see, and business owners are concerned. What changes in the kind of new model that you're hoping to promote if elected?
I haven't got that model because I'm an expert in writing educational software. I'm not an expert in mental health. I know that we're bringing in people who are experts in it. Peggy Shaughnessy, as an example, has had a great deal of work with a lot of different areas. She's somebody that we could tap on the shoulder and say, can you give us help with this? Can you give us feedback? Because you're right there in the trenches. You know what's happening. You're dealing with it. And then we'll come out with the plan afterwards. Going back to what I had said earlier, it's about doing the needs analysis and the gap analysis before
But you
come
put
up
a
with
price tag on the program already, which is intriguing.
It is. We're committed to that as our baseline for it. But it doesn't mean that that's the only amount that we're going to spend. And as we spend more money in different areas, you're going to find that there's efficiencies in other areas. We know right now that we can start with this and we can afford this. And as we start doing that and find those efficiencies and find that we're not spending money in different areas because of that, that filters money back into the system that can be spent in an appropriate way.
I'm going to cut us off there. We're going to take a short break right now, and then we're going to get right back into this, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
All right, awesome. Then we'll be right back. All right, so we're back on. Let's talk about Monday. Doug Ford was in town Monday, right?
Doug Ford was in on Monday, yes.
Yeah. Did you have a chance to sit down and talk with him, or?
Yeah, actually, we had a roundtable before the event started. We brought in a number of teachers, both from the elementary panel and from the secondary panel, and they talked to Doug about what their experiences were and where some of the challenges were for them to work with students. And really, that's the type of approach that Doug has been taking all along. When he was here the last time, we met with 9 different doctors from our community to talk about what the issues were that they saw and how could we make changes in healthcare to better serve patients. So, from my perspective, Doug has been fabulous to work with that way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on Doug Ford as the Ontario Party leader?
I had never really met Doug before the leadership. I might have spoken to him in total 5 minutes at different PC conferences or conventions. It's well known that I endorsed Christine Elliott. I'd known Christine for a number of years, and I was very familiar with what she had done with the special needs community in the Whitby area. After Doug won, I have had the opportunity to spend a number of hours with him, to meet with him on a number of different occasions, and my opinion of Doug has changed significantly since I've actually had the chance to meet him and spend some time with him. He's one of the most approachable, down-to-earth guys I've ever met. And it's kind of funny that you say that someone who is as personally wealthy as he is basically just like one of the other guys. He's the kind of guy that I could invite over to my place on a weekend, turn the barbecue on, and watch the football game, and Doug would fit right in. Or I could take him to one of the business meetings dealing with some of the people that I have had to deal with in the past, and he would fit right in, right there.
Well, that's always been the Ford brothers' strength, was that, these were guys that, they were teaching kids how to play football, and they were people that would always pick up the phone for their constituents. They always seem very approachable, from at least a constituent perspective, maybe not from a media perspective, but approachable to just walk up and talk to.
He's very much the average guy who has done very, very well in business.
So when he's at the rallies, though, he's channeling the anger from a lot of voters. And I think people see, I would say angry Doug, but a guy who is saying, I'm fed up and I want this to change, and being critical of the NDP leader and being critical of the premier and the parties that have been in power. How do you channel that anger and turn it into a constructive move forward? If you win the election and he becomes the premier, that's a whole different ballgame.
It is, but when you're in the position of an election, the leader's role is a little bit different than what the leader's role is when you're in a governing position.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to picture. So, phase 2, if there's a phase 2.
In a governing position, it's about the strength of your team. Politics is very much a team sport. Caucus has a vote on everything. The executive committee, which is made up of all the cabinet members, they discuss things, and it comes down to caucus well before it comes to the legislative floor. At that point, the leader of the party is simply the spokesperson for the party. They only have one vote at the executive council, and they only have one vote in caucus. So it comes down to your negotiating skills and your ability to convey what your message is within that group. The most amazing leader looks like a very poor premier or prime minister if they don't have a strong caucus.
And having the skills to manage that team, because that's a lot of strong personalities and a lot of people that have invested in things.
But a poor leader will look exceptional with a really good caucus. Now, I'm a big fan of Stephen Harper's. I will freely admit that. I'm a big fan of Stephen Harper's. When Jim Flaherty was the finance minister, Stephen Harper looked exceptional. Jim Flaherty, in my opinion, was the best finance minister Canada's ever had. Joe Oliver is a very, very competent man. When he took over after Jim had passed away, I don't believe that Stephen Harper looked as effective. Nothing against Joe Oliver, but he wasn't Jim Flaherty. When you look at the bench strength that we have, just the finance minister alone, we have Vic Fideli, who's been our finance critic for a number of years, who is an exceptional person. We have Rod Phillips, who was the CEO of the OLG, as well as Globe Media. And we have Peter Bethlehem Falvey, who's the retired senior vice president of Moody's Credit Agency. He's actually the person who downgraded Ontario's credit rating the last time. He's very intimately familiar with Ontario's finances. Here we have three people who, in any other election, would be the shoe-in for finance minister.
Okay, if they're elected.
If they're elected. But
Yeah,
now we have to choose between them.
Oh, okay, well, it'll be interesting.
It will.
I'm still trying to picture what this would look like. Election night's fun because you always try to see the pieces fall together and see
Right.
who will be on the team and how it would work. So I just don't know if we haven't seen Doug Ford lead a government. So
Right.
And when he was on city council in Toronto, he was not a peacemaker.
No, but a lot of times the public image that you see with someone is not necessarily the same image that you get when you're behind closed doors in a meeting.
I know, but he's a premier. He's going to be in the public eye.
He is.
So that's the thing that people are trying to get their heads around.
But if I take it back to an educational setting, for example, a lot of times the vice president or vice principal of a school can come across as being a jerk.
Oh yeah,
But
so
that's the
disciplinarian.
role that they have to do. So there's a lot of students who don't like a lot of the VPs because of that. But once they become the principal, they don't have that same role. In a lot of cases, they become a loved principal. So it depends on the role that you have to take. Doug wasn't in a position where his role was to be the peacemaker. His role wasn't to be there as let's sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya. His role was to push forward an agenda and to make sure that happened.
So just let's Doug Ford's position as a peacemaker, or kind of someone who's kind of a bit more aggressive than that. If you look at kind of really sensitive issues like NAFTA, those are negotiations that are still ongoing. Those can go south at a moment's notice, and that's a huge problem for Ontario and Canada's economy. So you want a very skilled, very calm-headed negotiator there at that table.
That's right.
Do you think Doug Ford is that person that can do
I think
that?
Doug Ford very easily can be that person because I've seen him take on different roles already in the short time that he's been our leader. And I have seen him be a consensus builder within our own caucus. I've seen him talk to and meet with different stakeholders and truly be interested in what they're saying, asking them for their opinion and valuing their opinion.
As someone who's a stakeholder, I just went through my emails because I was away last week, and the language used in his messages against Andrea Horvath and Kathleen Wynne, liar, and just really, really strong words, and it made me think, oh my goodness. So,
but even just sitting down with you, just the language that you're using and that I've seen other conservative candidates using, it's very different from the language that he uses. And I think that's,
good point.
Yeah.
Just reading this string of messages for a full week about the Nazi meme and all this other stuff that has come up, it's very negative.
It is.
And the whole campaign has felt like finger pointing and blaming, and
It's been a volatile campaign, and that's not just
has.
Doug Ford, but that's
It's
it's
across
been,
with all of the parties. But you have to look at what's the leader's role going into an election versus what's the leader's role once you're in government or when you're in opposition. And you play a different role at different times throughout. Yeah. As premier, Doug's role will be vastly different than what his role is going into the election.
or as opposition, could be wicked.
Very different as opposition. The way our whole parliamentary system is set up, we have the governing party and then we have the opposition.
I know.
And it is there to be a confrontational role to
And
right off
it
the
is.
bat.
And it is. Okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah. We're just running out of time, but there's a couple things I do want to talk about before we wrap up, and that is income. And when I was at the Doug Ford rally, I talked to a couple of Ford supporters that were there, and the sense that I got from so many of them was that there's genuine frustration. I can't pay my bills.
Yep.
There was one small business owner who was talking to Doug in the middle of the rally who was saying that, she's had to close her small business.
After 37 years.
Yeah, and he had said that, I hope you reopen your business after June 7th.
Yes.
Which I thought was actually a really good line on his part. He's probably been practicing that one. But yeah, I just wanted to throw out there that, there's a lot of income related issues. There's a lot of
There is.
rising hydro bills. How would a Doug Ford government, with you being our local representative, how would that go?
Well, a lot of people, when they talk about income, they focus on what their gross income is. And they don't focus on what their net income is and what the cost of living actually is. So, for example, if you made $100,000, but the cost of living was $110,000, you're $10,000 in the hole. But if you lived in a different area of the province and the cost of living was $40,000 and you made $50,000, you're $10,000 up. What we have to be looking at then is, what is the cost of living? How much does it cost to buy what we need to buy? And then what is the net income of the people? Because the net income is the money that you actually have in your pocket.
Okay, so let's talk about the government controls the pieces of those
Sure.
expenses.
So let's start with the expenses. We know right now the cap and trade, when it was added in January of 2017, it added to the price of every single thing. We can't grow fresh fruit and vegetables in Ontario in the farmers' fields when there's a foot of snow.
Well, you can't do that either if the soil is not.
Yes.
Yeah, we've
Not
been having a
healthy.
few bad years where it's been really tough on farmers. So even
Sure.
during the quote unquote good months of the year,
Okay.
But it's
Yeah.
impossible to grow it in the fields in January. So we bring everything in from someplace else, or we have it stored and then we transport it from wherever it is to market. And
Right,
that
yeah.
cap and trade added a cost, an additional cost, because it added 4.7 cents per liter of fuel. Everything that is trucked into Ontario then, that goes to market for you to buy, it added a cost to it. And there was no offsetting way of reducing that cost for the average person. We're going to remove cap and trade because that will bring the cost of every single thing down.
So how are you gonna have a fund then to help to work on climate change and address
So
environmental concerns?
when we get back to the efficiencies that we had talked about earlier,
Oh,
that's
these
where you find money to do things. With the Green Energy Act, for example, it added significant costs to electricity. It doesn't provide an alternative.
It did it more so at the start, yes.
Whenever you do something like cap and trade or a carbon tax, what you're doing is you're adding an artificial expense to something to curb people's behavior.
Yes.
But if you don't have a viable alternative, then you can't be curbing behavior. All you're doing at that point is taking money from the taxpayer. It's possible in the city of Toronto to buy a electric vehicle and use it for your daily business. It's not possible in the rural part of Ontario to have an electric vehicle, to get down to the urban centers, to do the shopping that you have to, and then get back to it on that one charge. So saying that an electric vehicle is a viable option, it's not. A hybrid vehicle, yes, by all means it is. The cost of those is still too high. So what we need to be doing instead is we need to be investing in research so that we have viable alternatives to change the behaviors. The best example I have, and it wasn't one that was ever done because of green energy or carbon footprint, because we didn't know about that at the time. We used to heat our homes a long time ago with coal. Coal was very dirty, it was very inefficient, it produced a lot of greenhouse gases. Industry found a better way of heating, and we moved from coal to oil. Oil is still very, very dirty. I'm not suggesting it's not.
But it was a slow
cleaner.
process. But it was a slow process. We're at the point now where we have to accelerate our habits.
We do, but we haven't. The problem is we haven't been investing in the research locally to do those types of things. If we spend the money on research at local Ontario universities, now we become the center for that type of research. We become the industry leaders in it, which builds on our own economy because we have now the research that's been done, and we have the industry in this area to do those types of things. Rather than spending the money in South Korea on the research for solar panels, we should have been spending the money in Ontario universities to do that same type of research, and we haven't been.
So do you think once that research has been done, do you think that, a Doug Ford government at some point during his 4 years would begin investing in new technologies and new energy sources?
Absolutely we will be, because that brings jobs back to Ontario, good paying jobs back to Ontario, because we become the industry leader in the world on those types of things. Spend the money on the research, and it's never done. You need to constantly be investing in the universities and college systems so that you're doing that type of research. Get out of the way of business. Let the businesses do the things that they need to do. In Sudbury in the 80s, the smelting industry had to put scrubbers on their smokestacks.
They did.
What they found when they did that was they were capturing sulfur. They take that sulfur and they use it to make sulfuric acid for car batteries. The smelting industry in Sudbury today it's a much greener area than it was 30 years ago.
So who agreed to put the scrubbers on?
That was
the government.
That was
said
the
you
government
have
who
to do
said.
this. The
But they
government
spent
forces
the
you.
money on the research to determine how the scrubbers were going to work before they had to put the scrubbers on.
But the industry didn't do it until the government forced it to.
Right. Because there wasn't any investment in it. Once we started investing in the research for it and we found that you could have an ancillary product from it, the smelting industry makes more money from car batteries now than they do from smelting iron. That's the right approach.
Interesting.
Locally, we have a businessman who has a plant. I'm not going to name his name, but as I start talking about it, you'll probably guess. He's got a methane plant. He has a byproduct from that methane. Right now, he's taking corn and he's producing methane from it. He can take corn stalk. It's not as efficient. There's more waste from it. But the waste product from that, he can take over to a new plant that he's in the process of building and turn that into natural gas. The natural gas pipelines come into that area of the county. So he can feed into it. The byproduct from that is steam. That would just be wasted. But he's applied to have an electrical generation plant attached to it now, so that steam would power the turbines to generate the electricity. So he's taking his waste product from one industry, using it in a second industry, then the waste product from that second to create another. That's an intelligent approach to it.
Not everyone does that approach, so that's why.
But
often people don't change until they have to.
Right. Often people don't know that they can do those things, and often people don't know that there's the type of research out there that allows you to do those things. Previously, I had never heard of making natural gas from the waste product of making methane. What that also does for us is, at the moment, when the farmer harvests their corn, they plow that corn stalk onto the ground.
Yep.
They can harvest the corn stalk and create a secondary market for it. So not only are you saving energy, or not only are you creating a greener business, but you're creating a secondary income source for local farms by doing it that way.
Still not sure what this has to do with the provincial government, but
It's all about investing in the research to make the changes that we have. Because if we don't have a viable alternative, then you can't curb behavior. You're just adding to cost.
I want to broaden this topic a little bit because just one of the last things that we talked about before we wrap up, but just in regards to, there's a lot of people who think that the environment and dealing with climate change is probably one of the most important and understated crises that we're going to be dealing with. I know, during the public health debate that I attended a few weeks ago now, I forget who said it. It was one of the candidates, but no other issues matter if we don't deal with climate change, because
that was Ken Ramey.
Yeah. But I think there's a degree of truth to that. So definitely that's something that needs to be dealt with. How do you think that would be dealt with in a...
So whenever you go through a business program, whether it's a Bachelor of Business Arts or whether it's a Master's of Business Administration, then everything that we talk about in that is about sustainability and long-term sustainability. You're not having long-term sustainability in any company if you're not concerned about the environment.
That is correct.
And it is very possible for any industry to be taking a green approach to how they do things and be more competitive and actually make more money by doing it that way. What we need to be doing in Ontario is changing a lot of our thought process. Again, I'm going to come back to cap and trade to talk about that because I'll show it. With cap and trade, the way that system works is companies somewhere else have gone through an audit process. They determined how many greenhouse gases they were emitted. They changed their process. They reduced the amount of greenhouse gases that they emit, and they produce something called a carbon credit that they can turn around and sell in the world market. In Ontario, with cap and trade, we buy those credits. Which raises the price of the products in Ontario, but it doesn't change the behavior of any of the manufacturers.
You tell me it doesn't change. It has never changed any manufacturer's behavior.
It doesn't change manufacturer behavior because they don't have to.
It has changed manufacturers. Manufacturers have done things to change their costs and their impact and how much they'd have to pay. How many credits
they buy carbon credits so that they don't have to change their behavior.
Some of them can't afford carbon credits. They choose not to buy them. They choose to change their behavior instead.
I haven't seen any evidence of that. If you can,
work for one.
If you can show me that, I'm happy to see it.
We work for one. So anyway, but that's fair. But there is another side.
What I'm getting at with it is that we need to be doing the things that make business successful in an environmentally sustainable way.
Yes.
And I don't believe cap and trade is an environmentally sustainable way
As long as there's an alternative, you need an alternative.
That's right.
So Doug Ford's also said that he wants to scrap the Green Energy Act. He said it's a waste of money. The word that he used the other night was that it was a scam.
Again, that strong language that blows my mind.
Yeah. So, what would go in then in its place to kind of encourage that, it sounds like there needs to be some encouragement and research put into environmental initiatives to support that business environment to go after these policies and efficiencies. But how do you do that when, you have something like the Green Energy Act being scrapped?
The Green Energy Act was a noble concept with a very, very poor implementation. What we ended up doing in Ontario was we removed all of the coal-fired electrical plants. Everyone will admit that coal is a dirty way of generating electricity. It's a cheap way, but it's also a very dirty way. And when they removed it, they actually removed 7,000 megawatts of generation capacity, and they replaced that with solar and wind. The problem with solar and wind is you also have to have a backup generation plan.
That's true.
So the backup generation plan was to build the natural gas powered. And although they
bump up nuclear.
the NDP are talking about closing nuclear right now.
Yes.
When we put in the initial solar panels in the FIT program, it was 81 cents per kilowatt that we were paying for it. Coal at the time was about 0.9 cents per kilowatt to generate. Nuclear is about 3.8 cents per kilowatt to generate. So significantly more expensive. That's why you saw a lot of the rise in the electrical prices as well.
And the investment in the distribution system.
But the investment in the distribution system was to get the solar panel electricity and the wind powered electricity back onto the grid. It was not an investment in the actual grid that we had at the time.
It was part. But anyway, we can argue on that. Carry on.
So we had at the time, and I'm going to get into some numbers that most people aren't
And then we have to
going to
wrap
really
up
understand. We used to be able to generate 27,000 megawatts at any given second. Our peak consumption prior to 2009 was 24,000 megawatts of electricity at any given second. Since the recession in 2009, our peak has been about 22. We now can produce 36,000 when you count solar, wind, and all of the ancillary generation that they had to add as backup to it, but we're only using 22. So we are 50% more than what we can actually use. Although nuclear only makes up 30% of our total capacity, it's actually 60% of what we actually use. The rest is being augmented by solar and so on. When solar is producing, when wind is producing, the contracts are written so that we have to buy that. You're buying that electricity at 80 cents a kilowatt versus 4 cents a kilowatt. It's the consumer who pays for it. It was a noble concept that was implemented very, very poorly. And unfortunately, Ontario is paying for that. The ratepayers are paying for that. The gas plants that are not in operation still have to be paid for. So we're paying a premium to them to not be on. When we have excess capacity from the nuclear plants, we either pump it straight into the ground and waste it, or we sell it to Michigan at about a penny each. So we're subsidizing the electrical costs in Michigan, and we're paying exorbitant costs in Ontario for it. The Green Energy Act, I'll go back to it again, it's a noble concept. But the implementation was terrible. And you have to look at what the unintended consequences are of all of your decisions. You can't simply do something in a silo and not look how that affects the rest of the province. And that's how that Green Energy Act was put in. We're going to cut emissions. We're going to cut out coal fire. And we're going to do it here. It's the right thing to do. But they didn't look at how it was going to affect everything else. And they continued to add more solar-powered electricity. Although we are over capacity.
We are way over time, so we're going to cut it off there. I want to leave you with a short moment. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything that you want to mention before we wrap up?
Change is upon us. And really, on June 7th, when we come to the ballot boxes, the question that you have to ask yourself is, what change do I want to have? Do I want to continue accelerating over that cliff financial risk, or do I want to put the brakes on? On June 7th, I think that the responsible vote is to vote for Dave Smith.
All right. It's a great note to end it on. Thank you for being on the show, Dave.
Thank you.
And we will see the rest of you after the election. So, see you then.